The rope jerked hard. Someone shouted, "Hold it!" The pipe groaned beneath the snow. 5 meters below the ground, a 7-year-old boy lay broken in the dark. He couldn't scream. He never could. His breath was fading, his leg twisted, the cold climbing higher with every second. Above him, floodlights swept past and moved on. No one was supposed to look there. An officer froze at the edge, 42 years old, hands shaking, training screaming, "Don't." An old man stood beside him, 68, silent, listening, and a dog stepped forward. "Get the harness." He's alive, not for long. This didn't start with heroics. It started with a place everyone ignored and a child the world couldn't hear. And it ends with a choice that should never have worked. Before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe. And tell me this, where are you watching from right now? And what are you feeling as you hear this? I truly want to know how far this story can travel across the world. The construction site had been quiet for so long that the snow seemed to believe it owned the place. Wind slid across unfinished ground, carrying thin sheets of ice that whispered as they scraped against concrete. Half-buried drainage pipes lay scattered across the field, their round mouths dark and rimmed with frost like something ancient left behind and forgotten. Floodlights from distant trucks cut through the snowfall in slow arcs, briefly illuminating frozen dirt before the white curtain closed again. The storm did not roar. It pressed. It waited. Somewhere beneath that silence, a child lay still. Danny was 7 years old, small for his age, his body folded at the bottom of a narrow concrete shaft where light never reached. His blue jacket, once bright, once warm, had darkened with moisture, stiffening as the cold claimed it inch by inch. One leg rested at a wrong angle, twisted not by cruelty but by gravity and chance, the kind of accident that happens quickly and then never lets go. His breath came shallow and uneven, fogging briefly before dissolving into the cold air. He did not cry out. He never could. The cold did not rush him. It climbed slowly, patiently, as if it understood that time was on its side. Above ground, boots broke the crust of snow in uneven rhythms. Searchlights swept across the perimeter, climbing tree trunks, dipping into ditches, gliding over piles of frozen debris. Names were called into the storm, sharp, urgent syllables that vanished as soon as they left the mouth. Hands adjusted radios. Someone waved an arm to signal a new direction. The sound of engines idled nearby, low and constant, like a heartbeat trying to stay steady. Nothing answered back. Danny lay where no one thought to look, not because he was unwanted, but because the place itself had been dismissed. Too narrow, too dangerous, too empty to matter. The ground had swallowed him without protest, and the storm covered the wound without remorse. Snow slid steadily into every crack and opening, sealing the surface as if it intended to keep its secret. The search pressed on, but something had already begun to change. Officer James Miller stood near the edge of the site, shoulders squared against the wind, his patrol jacket dusted white along the seams. His face was set in the practiced calm of a man who had learned to manage his breathing when time grew thin. He scanned the ground slowly, methodically, forcing his eyes not to skip over anything, even when his mind begged him to move faster. The storm pushed back, stinging his cheeks, filling his ears with a constant hush that made every shouted name feel smaller than it should have been. This wasn't his first winter search. It wasn't his first missing child. He had learned, over years and nights like this, that hope didn't vanish all at once. It thinned, it frayed at the edges, it made you tired in places sleep couldn't reach. A voice cut through the wind, short and sharp. "Check the tree line." Boots shifted. A flashlight swung wide. The beam skimmed across the tops of frozen pipes and moved on, dismissing them without pause. The pipes did not look like places where children were found. They looked like problems best avoided. The storm answered that decision with silence. Below the surface, Danny's fingers twitched once, then stilled. The concrete around him held the cold, the way stone remembers winter long after spring arrives. His chest rose, fell, rose again. Each breath felt heavier than the last, not with pain, but with effort. The darkness pressed close, not threatening, just absolute. He did not know how long he had been there. He only knew that the ground felt colder than before. Above, the search pattern shifted. The perimeter widened. The lights spread farther apart. Someone spoke, voice lower now, closer to the ground. "We're losing daylight." The words weren't cruel. They were practical. But practicality has weight, and tonight it pressed hard. The construction site seemed to recede as attention moved outward, toward places that made more sense. Roads, paths, anywhere a child might have wandered on purpose. Snow continued to fall, softening footprints, blurring the story the ground had briefly tried to tell. Wind slipped through the open mouths of the pipes, filling them with drifting white, erasing depth, erasing edges. This was how people disappeared, not in noise but in omission. Danny's head rolled slightly to one side, cheek resting against cold concrete. His breath slowed. The blue of his jacket blended more with the gray around him. He was very small down there, small enough to be missed. At the far edge of the site, away from the cluster of lights and voices, another figure stood apart from the movement. An older man, wrapped in a worn olive field jacket, faced into the wind without adjusting his stance. Snow gathered along the shoulders of his coat and did not seem to bother him. He did not raise a flashlight. He did not call out a name. He listened. The storm moved around Jonas Hale, tugging at the hem of his jacket, sliding past his ears, filling the space with sound that most people tuned out without realizing it. To him, the noise was not uniform. It carried breaks, pauses, places where the wind changed its tone as it passed over something hollow. Beside him stood a German shepherd, large and steady, dark fur dusted with white. Shadow's posture was alert but restrained, his weight balanced forward, ears upright and still. He did not strain against the leash. He watched. The lights shifted again. Voices grew farther apart. The search was stretching thin, like fabric pulled too wide. A short command cut through the wind. "Move up." The order carried urgency, but also acceptance. Jonas's gaze moved across the ground, tracing the shape of the land not as it looked, but as it felt beneath the snow. Shadow's head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring as he drew in the air. The dog's breathing changed, subtle but deliberate, as if something in the scent had shifted. Shadow took one step forward. Not fast, not sudden. Just enough to test the direction. Jonas felt it through the leash, a gentle tension, not a pull. He did not correct it. He followed the line of the dog's body, watching as Shadow angled toward the stacked concrete pipes the lights had passed over moments earlier. The dog's tail lowered. His focus narrowed. The storm seemed to quiet around him, as if the space itself were holding its breath. Shadow stopped at the mouth of one pipe and lowered his body to the ground. His chest pressed against the snow-packed edge. His ears pointed forward. A low sound moved in his throat. Not loud enough to carry, but deep enough to mean something. Recognition. Jonas did not speak. Behind them, the search continued to drift away, light by light, voice by voice. The storm thickened, snow falling harder now, faster, eager to close the gaps left behind. Danny lay beneath them, unseen, the cold creeping higher with every minute that passed, and above, in a place no one had thought to look, a dog lay still at the edge of the dark, listening to a silence that wasn't empty at all. The search began to thin out. The storm grew louder. The beam of James Miller's flashlight slowed as it swept across the frozen ground, its circle of light dragging just a fraction longer than before. Snowflakes cut through the beam at an angle, flashing white, then vanishing, like static across a broken screen. His boots stopped crunching. The wind filled the pause with a low, constant breath that pressed against his ears and made everything else feel distant. For a moment, the search did not move forward or back. It simply hovered. James stood near the edge of the site, shoulders tight beneath his patrol jacket, fingers stiff around the flashlight grip. He had learned over years of nights like this that hesitation rarely came from fear. It came from memory. Too many searches that stretched past midnight, too many dawns that arrived without answers. Hope, he knew, didn't disappear. It froze, layer by layer, until you stopped reaching for it because it hurt too much to try. The drainage pipes lay ahead, half buried, their circular mouths rimmed with ice. They were silent, empty-looking, ordinary in the way forgotten things often were. James's training cataloged them automatically. Too narrow, too unstable, too dangerous. Places where a man could get hurt, places where procedure said, "Move on." His light passed over them once, twice, then slowed again. The search behind him shifted. Footsteps moved farther apart. A radio crackled, muffled by snow and distance. Someone coughed. The storm pressed harder, as if sensing the thinness of human attention. James felt the quiet stretch, not peaceful, but weighted, like a held breath that had gone on too long. A few steps away, an older man stood still. Jonas Hale did not pace. He did not lift a hand to shield his eyes from the wind. Snow settled into the creases of his olive field jacket and stayed there. His posture was relaxed but deliberate, the way men stand when they have learned that motion isn't always progress. His head tilted slightly, not toward the voices or the lights, but toward the ground itself. He was listening. Beside him, the German shepherd shifted. Shadow's movement was subtle, almost easy to miss. His spine straightened first, muscles tightening beneath dark fur dusted with white. His ears came forward, not twitching, not searching, but locking into place. The leash drew a gentle line between dog and handler, not taut with urgency, just firm with direction. Shadow took a step, not fast, not sudden. Another step followed, deliberate, measured, as if the ground itself were speaking in a language only he recognized. His breathing changed, shorter, more precise, each inhale cutting through cold air that tasted of metal and ice. There was no bark, no whine, no flare of panic. His focus narrowed the way a lens does when it finally finds its subject. James noticed before he understood. The flashlight beam hesitated again, drifting back toward the pipes. The dog was no longer beside the old man's leg. He was angled forward now, body aligned with one of the concrete openings the search had already dismissed. Snow slid from the pipe's rim as Shadow lowered himself, chest pressed flat against the ice, paws braced, ears sharp and forward. The sight seemed to quiet around him. Shadow's breath fogged once, then stilled. A low sound moved in his throat, not loud enough to carry, not shaped enough to be called anything familiar. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a whine. It was something older than both, recognition. Jonas opened his eyes. He did not speak Shadow's name. He did not move toward him. He simply let the leash slacken by half an inch, a permission so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. His gaze fixed on the dark mouth of the pipe, not with fear, not with certainty, but with something closer to respect. James felt the shift before anyone said a word. His training pushed back immediately. Dogs could be wrong. Shadows played tricks in storms. Pipes collected scent, sound, echoes that meant nothing. This was how people got hurt, by trusting instinct over protocol. He had seen it happen. He had written reports afterward, hands numb, words careful and clean, while the memory stayed anything but. The flashlight trembled slightly as James adjusted his grip. A voice from behind him cut through the moment, sharp and clipped. "Anything?" James didn't answer right away. The beam settled on the pipe's rim, tracing the rough concrete edge where snow had been pressed thin. Wind slipped through the opening, carrying a hollow note that hummed faintly, like breath passing over glass. The sound was ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of sound you heard everywhere once you learned not to listen for it. Shadow did not move. The dog's body was still, balanced, ready. His tail lay low against the snow. His eyes were fixed on darkness that swallowed light whole. The low sound in his throat faded, replaced by silence so complete it felt intentional. James took a step closer. The storm seemed to lean in with him. His boot sank slightly near the pipe's edge, snow giving way to softer ground beneath. He paused, weight shifting back instinctively. The earth here wasn't solid. It hadn't been in months. Melt and freeze had turned it into something fragile, something waiting for the wrong pressure. Too dangerous. The thought arrived fully formed, heavy with experience. A pipe collapse, a rescuer injured, another emergency layered on top of the first. His chest tightened as old images stirred. Flashes of stretchers, radios pressed too close to mouths, words chosen carefully afterward. Shadow's ears flicked once. James lifted the flashlight higher, angling it downward. The beam cut into the pipe, skimming rough concrete walls before fading into black. Snowflakes drifted into the opening, vanishing without sound. The darkness absorbed everything, even the light. For a second, nothing changed. Then James noticed the smell. It wasn't strong, it wasn't obvious, just a thin thread beneath the cold, something organic, something warm that didn't belong to stone and ice. His breath caught barely. Sometimes the loudest cries never make a sound. The words surfaced unbidden, not as language, but as sensation. He felt them settle behind his ribs, unsettling, unwelcome. His grip tightened around the flashlight. The beam wavered. Shadow did not look back at him. He didn't need to. Jonas shifted his weight slightly, boots crunching once. Snow slid from his jacket sleeve. He still said nothing. His presence was quiet, steady, offering no argument, no explanation, just space. The radio crackled again behind James, another voice, lower now. "We're losing coverage on the west side." James didn't turn. The storm pressed harder, wind pushing snow into his collar, down his neck. His pulse thudded in his ears, louder than the search, louder than the wind. He leaned closer to the pipe, light angling down, hand braced against the cold concrete rim. The beam disappeared into darkness. James hesitated. The flashlight beam slid down the inner wall of the pipe, its circle narrowing as it fell, scraping rough concrete before dissolving into shadow. Snow drifted through the opening in thin spirals, vanishing as soon as they crossed the rim, swallowed by darkness that refused to reflect light. James leaned closer, breath held, knuckles whitening around the grip as the wind tugged at his jacket and whispered along the concrete like a warning meant for someone else. The storm did not shout. It leaned in. 5 meters below, the beam caught a shape. Still. Too still. A small curve of fabric, blue dulled to gray, pressed against the cold floor. An arm lay at an angle that did not belong to rest, fingers half curled as if they had been searching for something solid and found nothing at all. James felt the image lock into place behind his eyes. Sharp and immediate, bypassing thought and landing straight in the chest. A child. The ground around the pipe shifted under his weight with a soft, dangerous sound, snow collapsing into slush beneath a brittle crust of ice. James pulled back instinctively, heart stuttering, the training voice in his head growing louder all at once. Unstable ground, collapse risk, secondary victims, digging would bring the walls down. No adult could fit inside with rescue gear. Every line of procedure he had memorized rose up together, not as guidance, but as a wall. Don't. The word didn't need to be spoken. It lived in muscle memory, in old reports and long nights, in the quiet understanding that rules existed because people had been hurt without them. Behind him, the storm pressed on. Radios murmured, boots shifted, the searchline thinned, stretching outward, following logic that made sense on paper and failed in places like this. James swallowed, the cold scraping down his throat, and forced himself to look again. The shape below did not move. A voice cut through the wind, calm and unhurried, arriving without force. "He's alive. Not for long." The words did not rise or fall. They did not plead. They landed with the weight of fact. James turned. Jonas Hale stood where he had been moments before, snow clinging to the seams of his jacket, breath steady, eyes clear. There was no urgency in his posture, no outward sign of the clock that had begun to run. His stillness carried something else, an understanding shaped by time, not hope. James shook his head once, a reflex more than a decision. Training pressed hard against instinct, the way it always did when certainty tried to take the wheel. He had seen men pray in moments like this, had seen faith collide with protocol, had written the outcomes with hands that never quite stopped shaking afterward. Belief did not change physics. Courage did not reinforce concrete. Jonas reached up and adjusted the collar of his faded M1965 field jacket, fingers moving with practiced familiarity. The fabric creaked softly in the cold, worn thin in places where straps had rubbed decades earlier. It was the same kind of jacket he had worn long ago, in places where hesitation cost lives and decisions were measured in seconds rather than consequences. The motion was small, almost absent-minded, but it carried history with it, settling over his shoulders like memory. Shadow sat beside him. The German shepherd's posture was composed, weight evenly distributed, muscles coiled without tension. His dark coat held the snow without complaint, breath slow and controlled as his gaze remained fixed on the darkness below. He did not shift. He did not blink. His focus was not driven by excitement or fear, but by alignment, body and purpose drawn toward a single point. James noticed the quiet between them. Jonas did not look toward the other officers. He did not glance at James for permission or agreement. He turned his head slightly and met Shadow's eyes. For a moment, nothing passed between them that could be seen, yet the space felt full, charged by something older than language. The leash hung loose, a line present but unnecessary. "Get the harness." The words were soft, they did not echo, they did not invite debate. James felt the storm pause, not in sound but in sensation, as if the wind had inhaled and held it. His chest tightened. This was the line, the place where things changed and could not be put back the way they were. He searched Jonas's face for doubt and found none, only resolve shaped by experience rather than hope. A voice from the search line broke in, sharp and clipped. "Sir," James raised a hand without looking back. The gesture was brief, controlled, final. The decision did not arrive all at once. It settled in pieces, the image of the child below, the ground giving way beneath his boots, the calm in Jonas's voice, the stillness of the dog. These fragments aligned, not into certainty, but into direction. He felt the weight of responsibility shift, pressing not just on his shoulders, but into his palms, his stance, his breath. "Bring it," he said, the words short, edged with urgency. "Now." The harness came out of a truck in practiced movements, straps stiff with cold metal buckles clicking softly as they were freed. The sound carried through the storm, precise and mechanical, a counterpoint to the wind's chaos. James watched the preparation with narrowed focus, noting every detail, every angle, every point of failure that could not be allowed to fail. Jonas took the harness without hurry. He knelt in the snow, movements deliberate, and Shadow rose smoothly to meet him. The dog's ears flicked once at the sound of metal, then settled. Jonas's hands moved along Shadow's frame, checking fit and tension with familiarity that spoke of countless repetitions, of trust built not on words but on outcomes. Snow clung to his gloves as he tightened a strap, brushed it away without looking. Shadow's breathing changed, not faster, not heavier, just different, sharper, more focused, as if the world had narrowed to a single clean line. His tail lowered, steady, his muscles aligning beneath the harness as if it were an extension of his body rather than something placed upon it. Jonas leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching the dog's, voice dropping into the space between them. "Easy," he murmured. The word carried no command, only connection. James felt something loosen in his chest, then tighten again in a new way. This was not recklessness. This was familiarity. Two beings who had stepped into danger together before and returned with the quiet knowledge of what worked and what did not. The storm resumed its pressure, snow hissing against concrete, time pressing harder now that the choice had been made. The rope was fed through gloved hands, fibers stiff with ice, its weight coiling on the ground like something alive. James tested it once, twice, feeling the tension respond, grounding himself in the physical certainty of pull and resistance. The rope would not forgive mistakes. Shadow stepped forward. The line tightened. The rope slid through gloved hands with a muted hiss, fibers stiffened by ice, its weight transferring downward in measured inches. Snow brushed the rim of the pipe and vanished as Shadow crossed the threshold, his body aligning with the narrow circle as if the opening had been made for him alone. Light thinned quickly, collapsing into a dim tunnel that swallowed sound and depth, leaving only the soft scrape of paws finding purchase. The storm pressed closer overhead, but below, winter waited. Shadow descended without struggle. His paws met ice and stone with practiced balance, claws catching where smooth concrete tried to give him nothing. The harness held steady across his shoulders, the rope taut but forgiving, allowing him to move with intention rather than force. The air grew colder as he dropped, the smell changing. Metallic, damp, human, thin but unmistakable. Darkness did not confuse him. It narrowed the world to what mattered. At the bottom, the ground leveled into a shallow shelf of frozen concrete. Danny lay there, small and still, breath barely present, a fragile fog that appeared once and then failed to return for too long. His blue jacket had stiffened into shape, fabric creased where his body rested wrong, one leg angled against the floor like a question no one had answered. The cold clung to him with patience, a quiet claim that did not need permission. Shadow paused, listening not with ears but with body, measuring the boy's rhythm against the stillness. He did not pull. He did not rush. Shadow lowered himself carefully, placing his weight across the boy's chest and shoulders, spreading warmth the way he had learned to do in places where time was counted in heartbeats. His body rose and fell slowly, deliberately, offering a steady cadence the child could follow without being told. Fur met fabric, heat met cold, the world reduced to contact and breath. The storm above faded to a distant pressure, replaced by the sound of two beings sharing the same narrow space. Danny's breath caught, then returned, shallow but present. Shadow stayed where he was, unmoving, until the boy's chest answered him again. The rhythm settled, imperfect but alive, and the cold retreated by inches, unwilling but outmatched for the moment. Shadow's ears flicked once, cataloging the space, the slick wall, the uneven floor, the rope's gentle tension above. He shifted just enough to keep the warmth where it mattered most. Then he nudged the boy's arm, once, again. The motion was light, insistent without urgency, a reminder rather than a demand. Danny's fingers twitched, brushing fur, then fell still. Shadow nudged again, nose firm against fabric, breath warm against skin. The touch carried instruction without words, the simplest language of connection. Danny's eyes opened. They did not focus at first. They flickered, clouded by cold and shock, then steadied on the shape above him. Dark, solid, breathing. His lips parted, no sound emerging, only a thin exhale that trembled and stopped. Shadow adjusted, lowering his head into the boy's line of sight, ears softening, presence filling the small field of vision with something recognizable and safe. Shadow gently caught the thick collar of the blue jacket between his teeth. He tugged, not dragging, not pulling, just enough to signal direction. The motion was precise, rehearsed in a way that spoke of countless repetitions shaped by trust. Danny's arms lifted slowly, awkwardly, muscles protesting the cold, and wrapped weakly around Shadow's neck. His grip was uncertain, but sincere, fingers pressing into fur as if afraid it might disappear. Shadow held still until the grip settled. Then he lifted his head and barked once, short, clear. The sound struck the concrete walls and climbed upward, clean and unmistakable, cutting through wind and snow like a bell. It carried no panic, no question, only readiness. Above, James felt the rope tense. The change was immediate, unmistakable, transmitted through fiber and bone alike. His hands tightened, shoulders bracing as the line answered with resistance. Snow blew into his face, melting against his skin, but he did not look away from the pipe. The storm roared now, louder for having been ignored, yet beneath it he felt something else. Weight, real and present, a signal that cut through doubt. "Hold," he said, the word clipped, precise. The command passed down the line of bodies without argument. Gloves tightened, boots dug in. The rope hummed, a low vibration that spoke of load and balance, of forces aligning. James counted his breaths, measuring the seconds not by numbers but by sensation, waiting for the moment the system would either agree or fail. Below, Shadow shifted his stance. He adjusted his paws against the slick floor, claws biting where ice tried to betray him, back legs braced to take what was coming. The harness pulled against his chest, distributing weight, asking him to become something solid in a place that offered none. Danny's grip tightened reflexively as the rope tugged upward, fear flickering and then settling as Shadow held. Shadow did not climb. He anchored. The rope drew upward another inch, then another, and Shadow let the tension travel through him, muscles engaging in a controlled sequence. He angled his body to shield the boy from the wall, absorbing the scrape as concrete brushed fur and fabric. The movement was slow, deliberate, a dance measured in centimeters, not leaps. Above, James felt the resistance increase. The rope grew heavier in his hands, the strain translating into a deep pull that set his jaw and widened his stance. Snow shifted beneath his boots, ground softening with the pressure, and he adjusted without looking, trusting the men beside him to do the same. Radios crackled, voices rising and falling, but he heard none of it clearly. The world narrowed to the line between his hands and the dark mouth of the pipe. "Easy," he said, low and steady. The word traveled downward, not as sound, but as intent. Shadow answered by pushing again, back legs driving against ice-slick concrete, body becoming a living brace. His jaw tightened on the harness strap, not to lift, but to steady, to ensure Danny stayed close and protected as the angle changed. The child's breath fluttered against his neck, warm now, present, a fragile thing guarded by fur and muscle. The rope creaked. Above, a sharp intake of breath moved through the line as the load shifted unexpectedly. James felt it immediately, the unmistakable change that told him the system had doubled its burden. Not just a dog, not just a child. Both. The weight settled into the rope with a low, ominous pull, fibers stretching, metal biting, every hand responding instinctively. James's shoulders locked, teeth clenched as he leaned back into the strain, boots carving shallow trenches into the snow. The rope strained. The rope moved again, inch by measured inch, its fibers singing a low, strained note as it slid through gloved hands. Snow blew sideways now, fine and sharp, stinging exposed skin and collecting along the pipe's rim where light fractured and fell away. Above the opening, breath fogged and vanished in quick bursts. Below it, darkness pressed upward, resisting the intrusion of motion. The storm did not rage. It tested. The pull was slow, deliberate. Shadow locked his jaw into the harness strap, teeth set not to lift but to steady, muscles drawing tight beneath a coat darkened with ice. His back legs pressed against the slick concrete walls, paws searching and finding just enough purchase to turn resistance into leverage. He did not fight the rope. He answered it, letting tension travel through his frame until he became something solid in a place that offered none. The child's body stayed close, shielded by fur and bone, protected from the cold scrape of the wall. James leaned back into the line, feeling the load settle and shift, reading the rope the way sailors read wind. He said nothing at first, breath controlled, stance wide, boots carving shallow arcs into snow that wanted to slide. The men beside him mirrored the posture without being told, a chain of small adjustments that turned fear into function. Radios hissed and quieted, the world narrowed to pull and balance. Below, Shadow adjusted again, angling his body so the boy's shoulder cleared a rough seam. Concrete brushed fur with a dry, unforgiving sound, and Shadow absorbed it without breaking rhythm. His breathing remained steady. A counterpoint to the rope's hum, and the child's grip held, weak, earnest, enough. Shadow pushed with his back legs, not hard, not fast, but with a patience that understood distance better than speed. Halfway up, the snow shifted. It was not loud. It was worse, subtle, the soft surrender of weight moving where it should not. The pipe answered with a groan that traveled up the concrete like a warning sent too late. Above, hands tightened. Below, Shadow froze for a fraction of a second, recalculating in a space that had no room for error. For one breathless moment, everything held. The storm seemed to pause again, as if listening. James felt the rope quiver, felt the ground beneath his boots soften and then resist. He raised one hand, palm down, the signal spare and final. Hold. The word did not echo, it settled. Shadow waded through that single breath, muscles burning, jaw firm, body coiled and ready. He felt the pipe's complaint fade into silence, felt the snow find a new stillness. Then he pushed again, controlled, precise, driving upward with a strength that did not announce itself. The rope answered, tension easing into motion, the system agreeing once more. Light broke through the darkness. It arrived not all at once, but in fragments, glints on ice, a widening circle, hands reaching down into the mouth of the pipe with urgency that had nowhere else to go. Fingers found the child's jacket, firm and careful, lifting without tugging. Danny rose into the cold air, wrapped immediately in arms and fabric, his breath visible now, ragged but present. Someone swore softly. Someone laughed once and stopped. Danny was free, cold, alive. Shadow emerged last. He cleared the rim with a smooth motion, ice shedding from his coat in small, sharp flecks as he shook once, then again, the way dogs do when a task has ended and weather is just weather. The harness came away cleanly, straps released with quick practiced movements. Shadow did not look for hands or voices. He did not scan faces. He turned and went straight to Jonas. Jonas knelt in the snow. The movement was quiet, unremarkable, a habit older than ceremony. He pressed his forehead briefly to Shadow's, breath mingling, a gesture learned long before words were enough and carried forward because it still worked. Shadow stood still for it, ears softening, body finally allowing the tension to drain. Snow gathered on their shoulders and stayed. James watched from a few steps away, the rope slack now in his hands. Fibers warm where they had burned his gloves, something tight loosened in his chest, not relief exactly, not joy, but a release he hadn't known he was holding. He became aware of the storm again, of the ache in his legs, of the sound of his own breathing returning to normal. The sight looked different now, the pipes less anonymous, the ground less hostile, as if the place itself had been altered by what had just passed through it. Medics moved in practiced arcs around the child, blankets appearing, hands checking pulse and color, voices low and focused. Danny's eyes opened once, unfocused, then closed again, as warmth replaced shock. He was carried away, the blue of his jacket now hidden beneath layers of gray and white, a small life passing from danger to care without spectacle. There was no celebration, no triumph. The moment refused it. Shadow remained with Jonas, posture calm, presence complete, as if this were indeed just another task completed and filed away where it belonged. Jonas rested one hand against the dog's neck, thumb tracing a familiar line beneath the fur, neither of them looking toward the lights or the men or the child being carried off. The storm resumed its steady pressure, snow falling softer now, as if the sky had tired of testing. James took a step closer, then stopped. He had words ready, gratitude, acknowledgement, something official, but they felt too large for the space they would occupy. He settled instead for stillness, letting the moment stand without framing it. The quiet spread, not empty but full, a pause earned rather than imposed. Above them, the searchlights dimmed, their beams turning away. Trucks idling down as urgency gave way to aftermath. The storm, having lost its argument, seemed to quiet as well, wind easing into a low, steady breath. Snow continued to fall, but with less insistence, covering tracks without erasing what mattered. James looked at the pipe once more. It was just concrete and shadow again, unremarkable in the way it had always been. Yet something lingered there. A question answered, a rule bent without breaking, a line crossed that would not be crossed lightly again. He felt it settle into him alongside the memory of weight on the rope and a dog's steady breath in the dark. The storm quieted, but something still needed answering. The lights dimmed one by one, not all at once, but gradually, as if the night itself were exhaling. Engines idled lower, radios softened into background murmurs, and the construction site returned to something closer to stillness. Snow continued to fall, lighter now, flakes drifting down without urgency, settling where heat and motion had just been. The storm had not ended, but it had stepped back. Danny was carried away, wrapped in thick blankets, his small form nearly swallowed by fabric and careful hands. A medic's palm rested over his chest, feeling for rhythm, counting without counting, nodding once when the beat answered steadily. The blue of his jacket disappeared beneath layers of white and gray, replaced by the quiet assurance of movement toward warmth. No one cheered, no one spoke above a murmur. The space left behind felt larger than before. There was no villain waiting in the wings, no suspect to restrain or accusation to make. Nothing had been broken by malice, nothing had been hidden by intent. The danger had grown from neglect, from places dismissed because they were inconvenient to consider, from silence mistaken for absence. The storm did not care. The ground did not explain itself. Only misunderstanding remained. James stood near the pipe a moment longer, the image of darkness and light still layered behind his eyes. His gloves were damp now, stiffening as the cold reclaimed them, and his shoulders ached with the delayed weight of effort released. He watched as the medics moved away, their figures blurring into snowfall and shadow, carrying life back toward the edges of the night. The urgency that had driven every movement began to loosen its grip. He turned toward Jonas. The older man was already brushing snow from Shadow's back, slow strokes following the line of the dog's spine, fingers checking for ice caught deep in fur. Shadow stood quietly, posture relaxed for the first time, tail low and easy, breath visible but unhurried. The harness lay abandoned at their feet, straps darkened where cold and effort had met. Jonas adjusted the small American flag patch on his jacket, smoothing it flat as if setting something back in its proper place. James took a step forward, boots heavy with slush, the sound of them too loud in the calm that had settled. Words formed easily enough, gratitude, praise, recognition, but they arrived oversized, carrying more weight than the moment seemed willing to hold. He slowed, then stopped, unsure where to set them down. Jonas straightened before he could speak. He glanced once toward the path where Danny had been taken, then back to James, his expression open but reserved, eyes reflecting the soft scatter of light without claiming it. His voice, when it came, was low and unadorned, shaped by cold air and long habit. "Keep him warm." That was all. The sentence did not ask for agreement or acknowledgement. It closed a circle. James nodded once, the motion automatic, respectful, feeling the words settle into him in a way that no longer needed reply. Jonas gave a small nod in return, already turning away, attention shifting back to the dog at his side. Jonas and Shadow began to walk. They did not hurry. They did not look back. Their figures moved into the snowfall, as if returning to something familiar rather than leaving something behind. Shadow's gait matched Jonas's pace, long strides shortening to keep alignment, breath puffing in even bursts. Their footprints appeared briefly in the snow, side by side, parallel without touching, then softened as wind pushed fresh white into their edges. James watched them go. The scene did not demand witness, yet he gave it one, standing still as the distance grew, as light thinned around their shapes and the storm closed the space behind them. He raised his hand in salute, not sharp, not formal, but steady, the kind offered when rank was irrelevant and recognition was enough. He held it there until the figures dissolved into gray. Some heroes don't stay to be thanked. They do not wait for applause or for their names to be spoken into radios and reports. They move through the moment they are needed, then return to the quiet places where their work makes sense. They leave behind outcomes rather than stories, warmth instead of words. James lowered his hand. The construction site looked ordinary again, pipes half buried, ground uneven, snow falling without concern for what had passed beneath it. Yet something fundamental had shifted, not in the landscape, but in the way it would be remembered. A place once overlooked had given up a life because someone had listened where others had moved on. James turned back toward the remaining officers, toward procedures that would resume and reports that would be written. He felt no urgency now, only a steady resolve that would follow him into future nights like this one. The rules had not failed. They had been carried by people willing to see beyond them. Above, the storm continued its slow descent, erasing footprints, smoothing edges, returning the world to a blank page. Somewhere ahead, a child was warming. Somewhere behind, a man and a dog walked on, their work done, their presence already fading into memory. And in the quiet left behind, something unseen remained, not noise, not triumph, but a clarity that would last longer than the snow. The storm moved on, as storms always do. What remained was quieter than the night itself, footprints already softened, voices faded, the world returning to its familiar shape. In moments like these, it's easy to believe that nothing has changed. But sometimes, the truest changes leave no mark you can point to. A child goes home warmer than before. A bond proves stronger than fear. And somewhere along the way, trust quietly does its work. Loyalty doesn't announce itself. Courage doesn't ask to be seen. Compassion rarely arrives with noise. They live in small decisions made in the cold, in the dark, when no one is watching and no reward is promised. Often, it is not the loudest voice that saves a life, but the one willing to listen. Not the strongest hands, but the steady ones that refuse to let go. There are people and partners who walk back into the snow without waiting for thanks, carrying with them a quiet resolve to be there again when the world calls softly instead of screaming. They don't leave stories behind on purpose, they leave warmth, they leave hope, and that is enough. Not every hero wears a badge, and not every story makes the headlines. Here at Shadow K9 Unit, we keep their courage alive. Subscribe today so you'll never miss the next untold story of officers and their K9 partners.